This is always our, we save the best for last, the Venture Dealmaker panel. And we've already heard a lot about venture capital and the state of venture capital in China today. But, one of the questions I've covered as a journalist for many years now is the whole China, Silicon Valley. Where is it at now? And it does seem to be shifting somewhat, China to Silicon Valley now. And I'd be interested in your perspective on where you see this going, and if you agree with this China to Silicon Valley trend in innovation, and if so, in what areas? So Jenny, why don't we start with you?
So we've been working with companies, on both sides, US and China, and as Rebecca mentioned, I think in the first 10 years, 2000 to 2010, we have seen what we call business model migration from the US to China. As China starts to ramp up in terms of PC internet users and mobile internet users, there are definitely model, for example, e-commerce, search, social network, gaming, that, as they are relevant in the US, they are equally relevant in China as China internet population grows. In the last 5-6 years, as mobile internet starts to take roots in China as well, today China is the largest mobile internet market. And so within the mobile internet business model, we have seen now very interesting new features, new user engagement features that are unique to China. And therefore, we have seen US companies actually learning as well. So I think one area, Dave actually mentioned this, is in the social area. So social features, live streaming features, features where users are engaging with each other real time on mobile, the use of virtual currencies. Chinese consumers do not like to see ads. They prefer to pay for a virtual coin or a virtual flower that allows them to alleviate their standing within the virtual world than to watch advertising. So that's actually one trend that has, really taken off in China in a big way, largely from the gaming community, largely from, what Tencent has done with the community. And so that's also an area where we've seen now in the US, Facebook adopting some of these features, Snapchat with their, filters, similar. So that's one area. We have also seen companies like Musical.ly, Chinese companies. This is a Chinese startup in Shanghai where they built their first app called Musical.ly, and a very successful app that launches in the US and is one of the top 5 social apps in the US as well. So again, it's shown that it can work. Even if you're Chinese, if you're doing R&D in Shanghai, you can actually make a super app in the US. And then obviously there are other products, so hardware products, IoT products, companies like Xiaomi. Once you take on the China market, it's not enough, right? There's a world to go after. And so you do have companies that are also selling their hardware products, their robotics products, smart home products internationally as well. And then obviously there are 2 companies companies like UC Web, which are browsers, that has taken off in China primarily because of the mobile internet growth. And with that, they can migrate those same features to countries like India. Doesn't have to be US, but usually they may choose to go, to the other emerging countries as well. And so it may be learning from China now, and I think that at some point the two world is going to converge with the AI, data learning, machine learning area. I do believe that US and Chinese companies should work together, because this is where you get talented Chinese who are great math scientists in the US, working to solve real-world problems, and these guys may come back to China. So I think that the talent convergence on both sides is going to create a brand new category of startups that are more global in nature from day one.
Very interesting. And I know that Musical.ly actually launched in the US from China. It was his first market. So that's another trend-setting idea right there. So yeah, thanks, Jenny. William.
Yeah, sure. So most people know China Accelerator. We're helping international companies come into China, but we're actually helping Chinese companies go global. You could call it business model arbitrage, or it used to be copied to China. Now we're copying Chinese models out of China, but usually not to the US. We're mostly focused on Southeast Asia, Eastern Europe, and South America. So China's the largest mobile-first, mobile-only market in the world, and these are other large mobile-first or mobile-only markets. So about 4.5 years ago, we cloned sort of the Shanghai Xiaomi model. out to Southeast Asia, Eastern Europe, and South America without the hardware, because, well, the hardware is tough, as we've seen. Currently our MOX program, we have 130 million smartphone users on our platform. We control 30%, or control is a strong word, but we have 30% of the smartphone users in India on our platform. And we're taking Chinese companies like Photoplace, was it Tuqi? Tuqi, yeah. So they got their app of the year on Apple in China, 2015. They had 30 million downloads with no marketing. They raised Series A from Lightspeed and Sequoia in China, and we took them out of China, and they're getting hundreds of thousands and still soon millions of users. And they're actually, the user retention in Southeast Asia and India and Indonesia and Malaysia is higher than they're seeing in China. So I think there's a huge opportunity to go the other way.
You were just in India, right? And for the first time in a long time, right? So what were you doing there?
So we are working with our partners there. It is a smartphone platform. So I was there meeting our partners and making sure they're on board. MOX is a little bit different. I mean, it's very, in mobile, there's not a lot of VC money going into mobile. Because it's a money transfer. You have the VC gives the money to the startup, and then the startup gives it to Google and Facebook so they can get users. And we're trying to break that a little bit. So we give a small investment, because we're an accelerator, but free user acquisition to our companies in return for equity and revenue share. So we're trying to mix things up a little bit. So I was getting our partners on board with the revenue share side of things, because whenever a revenue share discussions come up, it gets a little complicated.
Sure, yeah. Okay, Edith, you've recently been named the head of China for 500 startups, and I know you have a vast amount of experience in Silicon Valley and elsewhere in Greater China. So what are your views so far of this whole question of where tech innovation is going, China, US, comparables?
So, testing, does it work? So Rebecca, I think when you and I met, I was still at Dolphin Browser,
Right.
which is actually a Chinese company that's based out of Wuhan and Beijing. The engineering and product team, the whole time for 5 years, the company been around. But when we first started, all our entire user base was in the US. So when we first started, it was really on Android. So there's really no Android, if you can still remember, there's no Android user in China at the time. So the user that we can get was in the US. And most of our team was actually ex-Microsoft. So we travel back and forth, and I saw particular focus on US monetization and user acquisition. So that's what my own experience. So now, fast forward, 6-7 years later, I really wish that there are more VCs like GGV, or now I'm 500 Startup. Obviously, I'm like 500 Startup is great, but there isn't actually a whole lot of VCs in Silicon Valley that I can name with less than one hand that really care about China. And I also feel like there's a lot of Chinese know so much more about Silicon Valley than what American thinks US is the world. Most of them, I'm not saying everybody, but most of them actually, if there's a lot of friends of mine will go to Silicon Valley and say, hey, I can help you to go to China. I can tell you most of the American startups don't really care. It sounds good, but at the end of the day, if particularly for early stage, most of them actually don't really have the capacity to think about China until much later stage. Anyway, also to put some number out there, as you guys know, 500 Startups, we run our own accelerator, and Dave mentioned usually about 2,000 or 3,000 application, and we take anywhere from 30 to 50 companies. I would say nowadays about 20-30% are actually from outside of the US. We have some Chinese startup actually join the accelerator, but it's so smaller percentage. It's really, I can sort of name, obviously Musically is great. Cheetah Mobile, another Chinese company who have done well and actually won public. But they're not a lot yet. Again, it's less than, I can count with my one hand. So definitely looking for, but I wanted just to throw it out there. If you're a Chinese company thinking about going international, of course you should apply for 500 Startup. But beside the point is really think about you almost need to redo product market fit. If you started with China market first, just like the reverse, you have to, ideally the CEO plus your product person really spend some time with true US users. The likelihood of you have to sort of redo your Chinese app or whatever you're doing is very, very high. And also naming is really, really key. Just most of the American can't even say any of the Chinese words. So you have to think about, redo product, redo market. It is a lot of work. Anyway.
Yeah, no, I do agree with you on particularly on that point about the number of Silicon Valley VCs who really get China, who really understand it. I think it was actually more in the past, but then a lot of them moved from Silicon Valley to China and set up localized funds. So that was, so anyhow, history there. Okay, Michael, tell us your view on the China innovation Silicon Valley pendulum, and whether your deal that you've just closed represents kind of a leading edge deal that might have happened here first in China.
Yeah, we don't do much of a U.S. deal, and I think most of Chinese companies think they're the center of the world. But I think it's naturally that way because we have a huge market here. But I do see, I have to agree with William. I know William a long time. When we're doing VC, when we're still young and slim, we always we always talking about C2C copy to China. The first innovation I think in my mind is it truly like originally born in China. It's pretty much focused media. And you can, arguably it's not really high tech. You put the screen in the, elevator is not really high tech, but commercially it's a huge success. I guess from that on, there'll be more and more innovation in terms of homegrown out of China. Not only coming to U.S., probably into Southeast Asia as well. So from my perspective, the linkage, it becomes stronger. Is that going to be a huge business? I still don't know yet, but it's getting stronger for sure. So I truly believe as a VC, you gotta have a global view in terms of what's going on. But then again, we operate our firm pretty much locally. You can have a local dedicated team. The thing we learned in Silicon Valley, the thing we learned in South Asia is really going to help our local operation, all the other around. Our Southeast Asia team can learn something in China, but then again apply to the local market. Even when they march out of the country, you just gotta understand where you go and what culture is. You gotta really, Alice is just saying, you gotta really tune your product. Because even in China, it's so big. The products works in Shanghai, but not necessarily fly in Sichuan. It just people are different. But I would say there'll be more innovations, no matter it's really hardcore technology or it's business model pivot. Originally from China and probably gonna copy all over the world. I think that thing do reverse a little bit.
So Gobi is one of those rare firms that's actually in China, but also in Southeast Asia quite a bit too. And some of the deals you've done in Southeast Asia have been really interesting as well. So how would you say that it compares China and Southeast Asia then? Because I know that we got a number of nominations in for the Forbes Asia project from Southeast Asia, and it seemed that there was a trend toward more innovation coming out of these kind of frontier markets.
Yeah. Well, first of all, the South Asia entrepreneurs are much younger. That's why we get like six people on 30 on Forbes.
Yeah.
I think that's one. The other way, I don't think China, most of my Chinese portfolio don't really care about South Asia at the beginning. But most of the ASEAN company, they came to go to China, understand the market, but more importantly, raise the money from China. I do I do see China as, at least in Asia, become a more capital supply center. Not only Chinese company can raise money locally, but also ASEAN company, because it's a good story. I prove myself in ASEAN. I want to go to China, and you got to give me the money so I can localize my product, my operations here. Even sometimes India company when they launch this, sometimes they check in China, Japan, Korea, occasionally. So that's what I've been witnessing.
Okay. All right, thank you. Patrick, Cooley has been here in China for several years now, so now you've got a history timeline as well. So what are you seeing are the major changes taking place in the entrepreneurial ecosystem?
Yeah. So actually, Cooley set up the first venture fund in 1989, the first dollar fund in China, that long time ago. But in terms of being here more present in the market, it's been about 5 or 6 years. Is this working? Yeah. I mean, it's a mature ecosystem here, very mature. I mean, I think when I was probably before I started spending a lot of time in China under the mistaken impression that it was a more not as mature, and certainly over the last 6 years, I mean, the convergence and the interrelationship between the Valley and China and the emerging ecosystems in Southeast Asia and the connectivity between the entrepreneurial system, it's really hard to divide people up anymore, really, because you've got entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley that are learning from Chinese entrepreneurs. You've got so many successful companies now that have come out of China as well. So they've spun off a lot of serial entrepreneurs, and those serial entrepreneurs are mentoring young companies here and elsewhere. And so that ecosystem now is much more developed, right? And so, I mean, the question I hear that sort of is, who's going to win the innovation war? And the answer, I think, is, everybody's going to win because it just feeds on itself. We all say, wow, bike sharing, what a great idea. You're solving this problem. And then it makes you think about all these other things, right? Yeah. And so I think as the ecosystem continues to develop and the world gets smaller and smaller and smaller every day, we'll just see more and more of that synergy where you see a business model in another country that's really successful because that country has certain attributes, and then you replicate it in other places and tweak it slightly because you know that this other economy or system has different attributes, So I think entrepreneurs are getting really, really smart, and investors as well, right? You've got great, some of them sitting up here, you've got great access to really wise brains that have made a lot of mistakes themselves and also seen a lot of mistakes made, so they learn from them. So it's a great time because there's a lot of good access to brains.
Yeah, absolutely.
And money.
And money. So yeah, I was going to get to that. Is there too much money chasing too few deals today, causing valuations to be explosive?
No. Well, if you look at 2015, in terms of the amount of US dollar fund raised, the amount of dollar fund that's raised in China is only a third of what was raised in the US. But if you look at the market potential of just the domestic market in the US versus China, as I mentioned earlier, China is a much larger internet market. Just to give you a little bit more sense of why, if you're sitting in the US, why it does make sense to take a look at China, as Edith mentioned. So number one, China has about 800 to 900 million PC internet users, close to 750 million mobile internet users. Of that population, there are about 350 million mobile gamers. So if you're developing a little mobile game, China has 350 million mobile gamer. If you're doing PC hardcore MMO game, China has about 100 million PC gamers. These are the hardcore guys. And if you're looking for the millenniums, China has over 300 million millenniums. If you're just targeting, white collar shopping, white collar women, there's about 150 to 200 million in China alone. And if you're into hardcore tech, you're looking at autonomous driving, looking at cars. China right now is the largest automotive market in the world. It has an installed base of over 120 million cars today, adding about 20 to 3 million new cars a year. And of that installed base, only 6% are new energy car. The government is extremely, extremely supportive of moving China away from, the pollution that we're seeing from the roads, that's causing, mainly from the traffic, in the city. And so, in terms of government regulation, in terms of support, that's also a category that's due to grow. So whatever entrepreneurship, whatever startup that you're looking at, you can fight that market in the US, or you can expand that market to include China as well. So I think from that perspective, I think we still need more capital in China, but I think what we need is capital that are more diversified across the stages. They are more focused around different verticals, maybe less PE in terms of saying, hey, let's just do less traditional investments, but really to fund more innovation within the sector, whether they are evolutionary innovation or disruptive innovation. So I'm not afraid of competition. I welcome more people to come. Also welcome more startup entrepreneurs to come, because there is actually pretty meaningful capital and, more importantly, a market here.
So plenty of runway left, right? Plenty of runway left. William. Okay, William.
So we're an accelerator. People don't come to us for a lot of capital because we don't give that much.
They come for the market and the good looks.
Yeah, okay. No, they come for our help and our awesome mentors. We have 250 mentors. So the issue is that because a lot of our companies, we're maybe 1/3 local, 1/3 international, and 1/3 cross-border, that's basically international. And most Chinese investors don't invest in international ideas or companies or cross-border companies. So we end up actually focused more on building a business, having revenue. The last batch, I think 40% of the companies exited the batch cash flow sort of break-even-ish. And so it's about really making money because the fundraising isn't there as much as for, you don't have a lot of people throwing mad checks for 3 usually guys, but sometimes women, and a napkin idea. So within those constraints, we're not seeing a downturn or upturn. Actually, there's more and more willingness to invest in cross-border and international teams off a very low base.
Okay, thanks. Edith?
I think what Jenny said earlier about 300 million gamer, 750 million of mobile internet users, or 900 million of the people who have access to internet, that equal to 3x U.S. population, 2x U.S. population. Oh man, the entire U.S. population could be playing game. That's insane to me. Just kind of thinking through in terms of consumer market, definitely is really, really huge. But one of the things that I started to think more is not only about the technology, on just some really fundamental things in China, education, healthcare, just 2 things that they're willing to pay. Particularly with healthcare, they need help. So my mother actually went through her thyroid surgery a couple years ago, and she just, even though she lives in Hong Kong now, she really believed just have to go to Guangzhou to go through the surgery. And even we know exactly who the doctor is, and we have Guanxi and get the best doctor. I still have to go line up and pay. And it was 6 RMB or 50 RMB or 80 RMB. I'm thinking, why would anybody pay 6? I didn't get that, but there's just so many people. There's a lot of things that need to be addressed. So it's not just, I'm not only looking at because it's a cool tech, there's real needs. By the way, I was talking to a friend, I didn't realize, I don't know if you guys have eaten the 周黑鸭, 鸭脖子, the duck neck snack. Even that, they want to go public. And I'm like, even a duck neck company can go public. It's mind-boggling, right? But if you think about it, even with only 10 million paying customer, because it's China, so even you're a duck neck, you're still a big data company, if you think about it, right? So it's not, there's some things that you think is really fundamental, but once you get this massive, volume of users, yeah, it's amazing. There's something to think about.
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, the ladies on panel are very good at math. That's very impressive. But I think it really depends on perspective. how we define capital is oversupply. I think in the sense of a people willingness to really create or innovate, I think it's a bit of a problem because look at how many buy company got funded. I just wondering, well, boy, do you have any better thing to do? Just print out a different color bike and put on the street. But I think it's also kind of a VC's fault as well because we want to generate the quicker and better return. And once you give me a proven model, I tend to agree that I guess it's lower risk. We kind of encourage that. So in that sense, I think the capital is definitely oversupplied. But if you think of the market size, think of the potential. A lot of Middle West youngsters haven't really reached the first-tier cities lifestyle. Think about immigration. Opportunities is plenty, but I guess because a lot of the low-hanging fruit in terms of model, in terms of creation, innovation has been picked up in the last 20 years. I guess now, as an entrepreneur, you really need to think harder, like really truly believe that, and you have to be like, be alone. Sometimes you have to fight all the difficulties and really, achieve that. It's been, difficult. So I think in that sense, a little bit oversupply.
A little bit. Okay, we have a little bit of a disagreement here then.
I disagree. I think that if you are the best company in the category attacking the largest market in the world, there will always be in demand for more capital. Didi, for example, right, on the ride-sharing side, it's the largest player now in the China market, and they continue to fundraise. But now the fundraising source of capital it's coming from international players. The last round was done by Apple, right? Apple in the US, who did not invest in Uber, decided to invest $1 billion in Didi, a China player. There's a rumor now that there's going to be a new round of financing of over $6 billion to be invested in Didi from a Japanese investor. And so, if you think about it, is there enough capital in China versus the rest of the world? No. But if you're, the top company in that category, you may need to raise more capital, even from outside of China. So I think that may be, I know where Michael is coming from in terms of saying that, if you have an idea that does not have competitive advantage from a technology product and really relies on just an operating model that needs capital to support, then it's really a race to the finish. So the competition there is more about the team. Whether that team in that same startup trying to do the same business model, whether you have the right team that can actually run faster, actually fundraise faster. So maybe the competing level isn't product technology, all that great stuff that we like to talk about, competitive advantage. It's just about, can you stand out here in front of investors and be able to convince them that you are the best team? So the marketing ability, the fundraising ability becomes top notch. So that's not the model that I like as well, but unfortunately there are operating models that are highly dependent on that ability to fundraise. So, I'm all about competition, so if that's the business that you want to be in, then be the best. If it means you have to hire someone to help you fundraise and talk to the international market, as what Didi did when they recruited Jin to join the company, then do it, because that's what's going to make you number one. Sorry. I still believe China is the place to be in.
That's great. We got you on video. All right. Patrick, who has the upper hand these days, the entrepreneurs or the VCs, when you're seeing these deals come across your table?
That's a really good question. So I was going to say, a lot of people come to us and they say, hey, what's the market like? How easy? What's the funding? We do about 70 to 100 deals a year, from early stage to later stage. And it's interesting, 2005 was just lots of deployment of capital. And so 2006, I think we saw a lot of, it slowed down a bit, and definitely companies that weren't doing well were having much harder time getting funding. This year, I'd say it's busy. It's very busy. I mean, capital is getting deployed, but it's also very discerning. I think it's probably not getting easier for VCs to discern between the haves and the have-nots, or the ones that are hitting their business plan and are doing what they said they're going to do 2 years ago, or they're not, or the ones that, it's really tough for those companies that are sort of tweeners, they're doing fine, they're doing okay.
The
but
tweeners.
but they're not,
Okay.
they're not blowing away their plan. They don't have the growth yet. They're starting maybe to get judged a little bit on things like, revenue. And those companies have a really tough time, especially if they've been around for a while. They have a really tough time getting funding. So I think to Jenny's point and point others have made, you do have to spend a lot of time thinking about, which investor is the right investor for me right now, because it's not always a Gobi or a GGV or a 500 startups. It may be strategics. Oh, sorry. I forget which hat you're wearing these days. Sorry.
Too many brands.
You see a lot of strategic investors as well that make a lot of sense for companies, and that's a great source of financing, particularly if you can combine it with some financial investors to sort of calm down the strategics a bit. But we see a lot of those deals, and those are great. They're tough because the strategics come with their own intentions around what different things they also want as part of the deal, but they can be really, really advantageous.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Also, I wanted to ask the panelists, what kinds of tech innovations are you seeing today out of China that really interest you? If you could name just one or two, each one of you, and why? Just real quickly down the line, because I know a lot of people are anxious for the networking and all that. So let's go down the line, Jenny, and so forth.
Just maybe a quick one. So we are spending a bit of time looking at companies that are adopting machine learning. You can call it AI or data mining. But we are looking at those companies that are trying to address, the education vertical, the financial vertical. I think those are two verticals that are extremely interesting, that has been stuck in the 2.0 model, which are a bit more traditional. The only online you get them is you get to buy securities online, or you get to have an education course online. I think what machine learning can do is maybe, allow these two traditional industries that's not as scalable to scale beyond, say, for example, in education, instead of relying on actual teachers, can you actually learn from a bot? And so are there processes within the education side that you can actually learn from a machine, robot versus a real life teacher, maybe not the whole course. And then in the financial space, I think there's a lot of data online now. There's a lot of fraud online as well. There's a lot of ID account being stolen. So how do you use machine learning? How do you use data to allow for more real-time fraud detection? That's actually a very good way to really harness the power of machine learning.
Okay, machine learning. William.
So, Jenny, I've got this company sitting back there called Rickeye Labs.
Come talk to me.
What they do is they use machine learning and natural language processing to do one-on-one language learning between a real life teacher and a student, but it's got a chatbot assistant.
Great early stage.
Yeah. So the chatbot assistant actually helps the teacher answer the questions, and a lot of language learning is repetitive. So you start with one-on-one lesson, and then it goes to one teacher can teach 5 people one-on-one at the same time. And now we're up to over 200, one teacher teaching 200 one-on-one lessons at the same time. Accordingly, I think the teacher got asked out on 5 dates.
If I get a deal of this meeting, it will make my
here
day
we
very
go.
meaningful.
So anyway, thanks for the layup.
All right.
Happy to.
So just one thing, right? I didn't know until I was reading about, China is the first country actually uses CRISPR-Cas9 to test on human. I'm just so impressed. Even though obviously, came from Berkeley, or I guess / Harvard, but it's amazing. And companies like BGI Genomics collected over 1 million of, prenatal blood sample data. That doesn't happen in the U.S. I found it fascinating.
Mm.
Yeah, I really like fintech. It's a huge space in China. China's been obviously very ahead of in terms of infrastructure, people willingness to try new things. But again, I think it's still a very high potential. Penetration is still very low. A lot of new technology can be used. Of course, you got to bypass the policy issue, but I think the potential is huge.
Mm-hmm. Okay, fintech. Patrick, do you want to add?
Well, this is, consistent with what you said, Edith, which is I would go with healthcare. I mean,
Healthcare, okay.
it's still pretty early days, especially if you look at things like drug discovery, like innovative drugs in China.
Mm-hmm.
There's only a couple companies out there, but those companies are really exciting, and they're going to be, $50 billion companies before we can blink, probably.
Okay.
So it's a great sector, and I mean, there's a lot of money going into it, but it's still very early, I think.
Yeah. Okay. So for the entrepreneurs out there, I'll just ask, what is the leading factor that would persuade you to invest in a startup? Is team, talent, technology, business model, something else? Is there one thing? Is there one factor that puts you over the top? Yes, I'm going to invest in this entrepreneur.
Well, it's got to be the team.
The team.
Yeah, because
Okay.
that's the only factor that can evolve down the road. Whatever you face, business model, sector, you can always change. And also, if you have a good team, like Bob just did, you can raise a lot of money. It's kind of very important ability nowadays. So yeah, I mean, it's a good team is definitely number one factor.
Does everyone agree with that, team?
Oh, I think that companies can fail because of one reason, but usually they are successful because of many reasons. Because the market fit is there, the product fit is there, the team fit is there. But I think I'll add one more as an investor, and that would be the investor and entrepreneur's chemistry.
Okay, that's very good. Yes.
I think that it's a long-term process in terms of the whole startup process, from ideas to growth to when you become a public company, and so it's really not a one-night stand. It's a long-term journey, and so it's actually very important that you share certain chemistry with this investor, this board member, whom you can go to and discuss when you're facing challenges and issues, and share the joy when you're standing up there. Ringing the bell for IPO. So I think that's what I look for. I don't want to look for a team that may be super duper, but they are not like me. They don't share similar values or our views in terms of where the market and integrity of where the company should be.
I love that. I just want to add that this is the one relationship you have no problem signing the prenup before you even get into.
That's right.
Sure.